with that, I will let Mia start the discussion or the introductions and then on to the discussion.
Thank you, Nisa. So I'm Mia Escovedo-Little, and today I'll be your moderator. I work in the digital crimes unit at Microsoft, and I became interested in blockchain technology as cryptocurrency is one of the ways that criminals try to mask their activities. And one of the ways for us to understand how to disrupt those operations is to understand how it works. And so that aside, I'm looking forward to traveling to Napa Valley post the pandemic. And then I'll just move it on to Michael for introduction.
Yes. Yeah, hi guys. My name is Michael. I'm from Switzerland, and I am a blockchain lawyer. I work at a law firm in Zurich, where I predominantly work on blockchain matters, also in privacy cases and IT law in general. I got interested in blockchain when I was still living in Seattle in the United States after finishing my LLM program, and I was looking for a job back in Switzerland, and I didn't really know that I would like to work in this space. It was more that the law firm that ended up hiring me had a really big blockchain practice, and they basically asked me to get up to speed while I was still in Seattle. So I used a lot of my time to really read everything about blockchain that I could. And yeah, that's how I ended up becoming a blockchain lawyer. And yeah, one thing that I look forward to in a post-pandemic world is going to a beach and spend a day, a sunny day at the beach.
Navroop.
Great, lovely. It's gonna be hard to follow up on that, but since I do live near the beach, I have to think of something else. Great, thank you everyone for joining. I see some familiar faces here, Terry and Anthony, Sydney and others. So it's great to have folks, I see it a whole bunch of different places and have the opportunity to work together with. Yeah, my name is Navroop Sahdev, and I'm the founder and CEO of a global impact ecosystem called the Digital Economist. What we're doing is we're combining economic science with emerging technologies and sort of converting that into business strategy. So it's very interesting, and we have a whole bunch of initiatives, including blockchain. I've been in the space for 5 to 6 years now. And back in 2016, I often talk about how there were just crypto enthusiasts and then some sort of early consultants in conference rooms. And we've come a long way from that. And I'm really excited and kind of, just enthusiastic and keen to see just the pouring in of different kind of waves of interest and people, currently obviously NFTs and the artist sort of creator community being the big one. What am I looking forward to in the post-pandemic world? Honestly, to see my family and friends, because I have not seen them in over a year. And pardon my French, but India is a shit show right now. And, I don't know if that's going to be this year, because we probably don't have immunity for the Indian variant of COVID. So if there's, I guess my call to action for anyone here would be, if there's anything you can help and support and do, consider doing that. So sorry if it wasn't like a dreamy paradise vacation, but I live in Hawaii, so I have no complaints. I just want to see the world recover.
Wow, thank you. So now that you've met our panelists, let's dive in to talk about blockchain technology. Let's start with some background, and then we'll move on to regulatory landscape, and then what blockchain looks like in practice, like what do you actually do with it? Okay, so let's get started. So Michael, what is blockchain? And what's this relationship with smart contracts, non-fungible tokens, and cryptocurrency?
That's a big question. I think a good way to look at blockchain is really like, instead of looking at what it really, how it functions from the technology, it's really more what it tries to solve. And for me, it's kind of an upgrade to the internet, right? So basically, the internet gave us a lot of opportunities to connect with other people all over the world, and use wonderful apps, send emails, and do a ton of other things. But one thing we cannot do on the internet right now is to share value, to send anything that actually has value, because when we do share over the internet, we always copy everything. So when I send an image or anything in email to somebody else, it's not unique and therefore doesn't really have value. So I cannot send really money on a blockchain. I cannot send a company share. I cannot send like a treasury bond or anything alike, because if I could, I would double it, right? If I did that, I would double it, and then the system wouldn't work anymore. So and so basically, when you look at that, what it tries to solve, then it's also easier to understand what Bitcoin really does, because Bitcoin is the first application of blockchain, and Bitcoin tried to allow people to really send money over the internet. And then, people often think, well, it's a digital currency, we have that, it's like frequent flyer miles or so, but it is very different, because what Bitcoin really does is that it allows you to send from one person to another person without any intermediary value, money in that sense. And that is unique, because when we use PayPal or we use other services or bank, wire transfers, there's always somebody involved in the transaction. You never really send value. You just always tell people that your account goes down, the other account goes up. But it's not like exchanging a money note, like a bill or something, right? So Bitcoin really is revolutionary in that sense, because it's the first time that I can send to Nisa, for example, a Bitcoin. Nobody else is involved. I don't have it anymore. She has it. And it doesn't sound that revolutionary, but actually it's a gigantic leap in technology.
All right, thank you. Navroop, you are an economist. So why would we use blockchain? Like, what are the challenges and opportunities that it presents to us?
Yeah, another big question. And I think Michael did a good job in sort of underlining the double spend problem and kind of the role of the technology in what we called ushering in the internet of value, right? Beyond the internet of information. From an economics perspective, as an economist, the infrastructure itself is centralized, right? There are people who own platforms that we plug into in order to avail any sort of service. If you look at the history of the internet, it actually is, it actually grew, for the lack of a better term, as a complex system, which means independent parts that talk to each other, rather than a body that decided, okay, we are going to grow the internet. But the way it has developed over the past decades is that there are few core platforms that became dominant to plug into what is the World Wide Web, which is this network that talks to each other. Google or Google search is not the World Wide Web. It is a platform that you use to access the web. And if you look at the Web3 Foundation and a whole bunch of other organizations, they were kind of really talking about kind of going back to the original vision of the internet. I think Tim Berners-Lee, who's the creator of the protocol itself, I met him a couple of times at MIT and at the World Economic Forum, and he's written some really influential pieces on how basically the internet got hijacked by a handful of platforms. So, I gave that background, history, and context to say that there are decisions and players and stakeholders that define the direction of the way technology is built out and who it serves. And that's important to remember. And blockchain, and I think the promise, and I've given endless talks on this at this point, I think the interest is to kind of perhaps go back to that original vision, which is decentralized. No one is controlling it, enables more than what the internet of value, or I should say the internet of information enabled. And it really kind of take it a step further. If we're looking at a very different sort of world now than it was, back in the 1990s when the first e-commerce solutions came out and things like that. So it is exciting for me because I believe that we should have a much more of an equitable and inclusive world. And because of those core values, my interest in the technology is with that decentralization, with cryptographically or algorithmic trust, if you may, embedded in the technology, we could probably see a better infrastructure, which by default doesn't just give value to the person who's building or has built the platform, but actually shares it. And I can talk a little bit more about that, what that means from a global macroeconomy perspective and things like that. But it's just very early for, I guess more of a visionary take to really unfold for technology to get built out. And then, of course, again, as is everything in life, it also depends on who is making decisions. So what I'm referring to here is the governance aspect of the technology, how the data is being treated, which goes both as inputs and, is also the exhaust of the system, a term I learned from Govinder. He's the ex-IBM, created, what became enterprise blockchain. And so all these considerations are sort of like playing out simultaneously. And what we're kind of seeing in the space, I think, is kind of waves of innovations, ICOs and NFTs and decentralized finance, and sort of becomes, one thing at a time or more. But I think overall, the opportunities are fantastic, but as I underlined, a bunch of challenges around data and what have you.
Thank you. Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point about, the decentralized aspect. So, it's difficult to really explain, all the properties of a blockchain in such a short time, but maybe where I left off before, to add on to that, when I say that it's a service that functions without an intermediary, or a technology without an intermediary, why is this important? I think, first of all, it is permissionless. So it really allows everybody, and that's, I think, what Navroop meant with more equitable, that everybody can participate. You don't have to meet any requirements. Everybody can really just, basically like the internet, as already the email system works today, right? Everybody can create an email account on his server and basically communicate with others. And so what Bitcoin did was in a way revolutionary, but it's so much bigger than that, right? That's a big the point, that you can do so much more than just share money. You can really create a participatory network where really people can communicate with each other without, transactions being intermitted. And I agree with Navroop, absolutely. I mean, we're extremely early. We're seeing this still very early in this development. And so Bitcoin is a simple application, right? It really allows you to transfer money in a sense. But when you look at Ethereum and more, sophisticated blockchains that have services like smart contracts, it gets so much more interesting, because then you basically have all these people all over the world, all these developers who come up with their own ideas and implement it and bring it so much further than the inventor actually had the idea, right? I mean, people who started Ethereum, for example, I mean, I'm not sure to what extent they actually had, decentralized finance in mind, NFTs in mind, but it happened, right? And it's still the beginning, and so many more things will come out of this. And I think we're going to be, very astonished in 5 to 10 years.
Michael, you brought up smart contracts. How do those differ from traditional legal contracts?
So basically, a smart contract is really just code, right? So in a way, it is a contract, because the idea is that you define rules that the contract has to follow. So in an easy sense, for example, somebody, think of it in the future, somebody wants to sell his car, right? Like his Tesla. And you have an access key that basically is just like a piece of code. You could basically program a contract that says, if Navroop gives the access key to that car into the smart contract, and I give, let's say, $50,000 in Bitcoin into the contract, then it automatically executes. The money goes to her, the car drives to my place, and I can interact with her without having to know her, without having to trust her, and therefore I don't need to have any third party that we both trust, like an escrow service, for example. So in that sense, they're very different than regular contracts, because regular contracts just say what should happen, but they don't execute automatically. And a smart contract executes on its own when the prerequisites are fulfilled, and therefore are, yeah, in a way like an evolution of the concept that we know.
Great, thank you. So what are, Navroop, this one's for you. What are the thorniest issues you work on in blockchain?
Crypto dudes, everybody has a hedge fund. Everybody's a crypto economist. People run away with billions of dollars. I think I just saw a news. Exchanges have been really tarnishing the reputation of the space. I mean, I think, Michael, you gave a good summary of the opportunity, but in many ways, kind of the reality is a lot more, complex than that, and a lot less rosier than that. And Mia, I should actually turn that question to you. What do you see as problematic in this space? And I know you work on that.
Some of the issues I see with blockchain technology is it is decentralized, and it is trying to enhance anonymity and in some ways security and privacy, but this really allows it to mask criminal activity. There's no insight. I feel like the regulatory environment hasn't caught up yet. And the whole thing's just confusing. And I don't see the value. I just don't see the value in engaging in it yet versus dealing with normal fiat, credit cards, cash, and just the way the system typically works. So I guess I'm not just confident in what blockchain means for us moving forward. So.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add to that, obviously, the big one is the criminal activity, because if you have anonymity, then, that comes with a whole bunch of problems. There's a difference between privacy and anonymity. I usually kind of explain that. But I think overall, of course, people who are opportunistic, who are smart enough to, use the technology, but then again, they're not really are the ones who are looking to, be the innovators in the space, to see an opportunity, and they're out there to, kind of just go after it and just, get the value that they can. And it's hard to say what's legal and what's illegal as well, to your point, because the regulators haven't caught up. I mean, they took their time with the whole ICO thing. I feel like that's probably now going to be the latency we'll see in kind of the NFT regulation. But I mean, the whole thing, I think billions of dollars were raised in ICOs before there was regulatory clarity on how different tokens would be treated, securities versus utility tokens and what have you. There were a whole bunch of initiatives from the industry in self-defining standards. So when regulators do come down, they just don't, the axe doesn't kill all of them. I don't want to name names, but there are a whole bunch of big reputed sort of projects and companies that came under scrutiny, and Bitcoin and Ethereum sort of passed the test of being decentralized enough, but that's not the case with most of the other initiatives, and kind of you can see that, and again, I think it's not a given that it's a permissionless ledger. It depends on which blockchain you're looking at. Most of the fintech and financial institutions have been looking at solutions that are permissioned. They do need to know whom they're talking to. That has to be compliant with the common law, 200 years of legal structures that simply aren't going to just go away. So they have to find solutions that are compliant with the current legal framework that they're operating in, and the technology is there for efficiency gains, as economists call it. So reducing the cost of business, reducing search and transaction costs, and just it being less expensive, and just reduce the time it takes for creating cohesion, for executing against things. So I think that's what kind of the more big players are looking at. And a lot of the kind of more purist, if you may, point of view we see is among younger companies that are innovating and are looking at the opportunities in the space. And again, well-meaning, but then you also see, just like, I guess, the gold rush or the early days of the internet, that kind of keeps coming up again and again. It comes with its risks. So to your point, actually, good friends with, the lead of blockchain in Microsoft since all these years. I didn't tell you about that, Mia, but yeah, I'm aware of some of the kind of challenges within the organization as well. And you're right, from an economic sort of prudence perspective, the first movers, while there's opportunity for extraordinary gains, it's also extraordinary risk. And that's usually not sort of the best from an adoption perspective for those who have more to lose, if you may. So I'll pause here. I've said a lot, but over to Michael and me as to what's next on the agenda. Maybe we can even have some questions from the audiences.
Before we move on, you did mention NFTs. Can you tell us what those are?
Sure. Non-fungible tokens. So essentially, tokens, I'm going to get this one wrong because I haven't been that into it, but tokens that cannot be split further, right, in terms of their value. Michael, did I get it right? They cannot be.
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
Great. So fungible tokens are the ones that, so say you have one Bitcoin, which is a fungible token, it can be split up to 8 decimal points, but that's not the case with non-fungible tokens. That means when you transfer value, the entirety of it would kind of get transferred. Now, it's important to remember where the data sits versus the address of, that sits on blockchain. So for example, the latest and the greatest that you need to know is that Beeple did a NFT auction, which is the way the space is raising capital currently, for $59 million, which is the biggest NFT so far, through an auction house called Christie's. But the art piece, and you should know that there is a art revolution, crypto art revolution going on right now. There's an interesting Forbes piece by Michael Del Castello on this, who's also at MIT with us at the Media Lab. And, with that NFT, the art piece actually isn't on blockchain. The address that points towards it is, right? So it's like saying, you're not selling the land, you're selling the map to the land. There's a difference between the two, and it's important to know the difference. And so the question is, who is it that's handing over the map to you? Do you trust that person? So the intermediary, there is an intermediary. It's not as, straightforward as sort of the more, again, purist, use case of Bitcoin. So you do have to trust that person. So we can't do away with trust, really. And that's kind of what I've learned being in the space for over 5 years. We wrote the first book on blockchain economics that came out for us really late, but it was January 2019. So already feels like ages ago. And, what's happening with these, a lot of graphic artists. And I think from an economics perspective, there are certain things, larger macroeconomic trends that are, fueling the growth of the digital asset space over and beyond crypto tokens, which is a subset of the digital asset space. And that is partly because of the fiscal stimuluses that you see because of COVID. There is more liquidity, money that's created out of nowhere. There's, $10 trillion that have been injected in the global economy and counting. There will be more. So that money goes somewhere, so that's partly fueling the growth of the digital asset space. The other is obviously digital transformation. And people are betting on the fact that the digital economy is going to be the key driver of economic activity in the future. Now, that writing is on the wall, right? And the digital economy would be significantly bigger than the physical economy in the future. So, and you know, on and on and on, and I can talk about other factors. So it's really important to see, I think, the digital asset space in the context of the overall global economy, and I guess the pace and change of globalization, the digital flattening of the world because of the pandemic. So I took that opportunity, Mia, to inject even more economics here. So I apologize for that. But non-fungible tokens are tokens that cannot be split further into what their original kind of value is. And I'm sure Mike can talk a little bit more on the actual technical aspects of it.
No, this is great to hear. I appreciate it. So I just saw in the news that people are selling like memes, like as non-fungible tokens, and I think a football player was going to do something with non-fungible tokens, and the whole thing's confusing. But Michael, unless you have something to add, we can move on to the regulatory landscape surrounding this whole blockchain ecosystem.
And actually, it's a very good segue. Maybe before we go there, I really like what Navroop said, because I'm not sure how many people are actually aware of this. I mean, it's like this, you know, like there's so many things people don't get wrong about blockchains. Like many people think there's one blockchain, it's the blockchain, as opposed like there's, you know, hundreds and thousands of blockchain. And also what a lot of people hear, which also I think is communicated wrong, is that you can store everything on the blockchain, which is just not true, right? I mean, when you think of it, I mean, what does the blockchain do? It's a really complicated system because it's not stored centrally. It's stored on, you know, thousands and thousands of computers, and it's very slow, and it's not very powerful in that sense. So, I mean, I don't really know the numbers, but when you look at the individual block sizes of Ethereum, I think it's like something 4 megabytes that can be stored. Like, I don't know, Navroop, if that's correct, but like it's a very small space, right? And like this image of people that are sold, like you cannot store like megabytes and gigabytes on the blockchain. You simply can't. So what it does nowadays, at least, is really just point to things. So what the NFT does, and Navroop explained it well, is basically it's like it's non-fungible. It means it's just unique. So basically, it's like a collectible. It's a perfect idea of an NFT, but it's not really there. It's not on a blockchain. It's basically you own, and I like the analogy a lot. You own the map, but it points usually to a URL or to a IPFS, I think interplanetary file system server, where you can basically upload it. But you know, the person selling you that people or whatever image it is, it can just, you know, take it away, and it's gone, right? And I like that as a segue maybe to the regulatory landscape, because that's exactly what it is when we talk about what is a token. Because people get, okay, Bitcoin, it's simple, right? It's money. But tokens can represent so many things, and maybe you can, Nisa, you can quickly share the first slide. So maybe as a little background, when I started working in this space, it was 2017, and we had, as Navroop mentioned, the ICO craze, which was crazy indeed, and a lot of people, you know, good people and bad people alike, made a lot of money. And so basically the key question really was, when people do an ICO, they create a new currency, maybe they create a new blockchain or a new token, and the question always is the same, right? You give them money and they give you a token, right? And so in the United States, as far as I'm aware, the key question really is it a security? Is it an investment contract? And is it basically regulated by the SEC? And so therefore, you know, you have to follow the SEC regulations that only accredited investors can invest, and so on. I'm not an expert in that field, but Switzerland took a bit of a different route. And they basically said, okay, we are regulators and we want to regulate the space. We want to protect consumers and the market. And so basically they came up with this classification system that is fairly simple, but still helpful. It distinguishes between 3 types of token, basically payment token like Bitcoin, Litecoin, or Monero, that can be used as a means of payment. And on the other hand, you have asset tokens, which would be the security tokens, which are typically like company shares or bonds or anything alike, that basically where you make an investment and somebody else promises you, you know, future returns or dividends or whatnot. And then you have the utility tokens, which are essentially unregulated. And obviously, you know, when customers came to us, they always says, we're a utility token, right? Because they knew that it's not regulated, but it's not that easy. And ultimately, when customers work with us, you know, especially we still have a lot of ICO customers that come to us. The first thing that we always do is to analyze really what are you really promising to your customers. And maybe you can go to the next slide, Nisa. This is a slide. It's our own internal classification system that the law firm where I work at has come up with in 2017. And maybe as a little background, so basically when I came, the blockchain, let's say the working group within the firm already existed. The firm did originally the ICO of Ethereum, of the Ethereum Foundation, which came to Switzerland. And basically, obviously, this gave us a lot of subsequent clients. And this gave us a lot of exposure early on in the space. And this looks like a very complicated graph, but I think it is really helpful to kind of understand what the token really does, especially from a legal perspective, because like when you have a Bitcoin, nobody promises you anything, right? You have a Bitcoin, but you cannot go to anybody and say like, you gave me this, you know, it entitles me to something. It really is not that. It's just, you know, a unit of account that you can use. Maybe somebody accepts it as a means of payment or maybe not. And so basically, this is what we call the typical utility token. But then you have counterparty tokens in the middle. And these are all types of tokens that basically have a right attached to it. And we as lawyers think of rights as something that it's a relative right, right? It allows you to get something like a service from a particular counterparty. Usually that's the issuer, right? This can be an IOU that, you know, you owe somebody money who borrowed money from you, or it can be a membership in an association or in a company. For example, a company share would be a perfect counterparty token because it's basically the share. It allows you to vote on company matters. It allows you to get part of the dividend. And then we have the ownership tokens, which basically the NFTs are, right? And the very right would be sole ownership tokens that you own something. And the reason why I'm bringing this all up and why I said it's a very good segue to the NFTs is because it is much more difficult to synchronize the token to the underlying right or the underlying asset it represents, and people actually think, right? Because that's where, you know, a lot of people made money with, I don't know if, you know, they're bad actors, right? But they basically say this token, you know, you can use it for this and you can use it for that. And then so many questions arise from it. Like in the NFT space, you don't really have anything. You have a token, but you don't own the underlying. Or if you have a company share, yes, sure, you have a token, but really in court, would that really hold up? So that's our biggest challenge, to really make sure that these contracts, because it's a lot of money in that space, and you want to do things right, because otherwise, you know, obviously you're gonna end up in court. And luckily, the clients that we advised so far have not really had to go down that route. But oftentimes we do have customers that are in court, that are sued. You know, there's a lot of class actions in the United States, you know, because they apparently made promises they couldn't and they didn't hold up. So yeah, that is just as a little overview, maybe to see from another jurisdiction what we do, because Switzerland is one of a handful of jurisdictions that is really strong in the blockchain space. And I think that mainly has to do with the fact that the United States, which had a head start, really didn't use it well. Not really sure why that happened, but I do think it has a lot to do with the regulators and basically the industry not really being aligned. And it's, you know, lucky for us in a sense, right, that Switzerland and Singapore and maybe Malta and other countries could build big practices. But yeah, it's just so much more than security or equity, you know, or what is it? It's really more thinking, when you participate in an ICO, what am I really buying? And when I buy an NFT, what am I really buying? And I think these are questions that people should ask themselves more often.
Thank you. You're in Switzerland and you have this classification model. What does it look like for international transactions? It seems like you have it together in Switzerland, but if there's a smart contract between the US and Switzerland, like how's that work? How's it enforced? What is the regulatory model for any type of international transactions?
So it's actually, unfortunately, it's still very fragmentalized. So when we look at the example of an ICO, when somebody wants to issue a token, obviously it's on the blockchain. And since, let's say our clients usually issue their tokens on Ethereum. And since Ethereum is permissionless, you don't really know if somebody's in Australia or in Canada or in Argentina when they participate in the ICO. So you simply don't know. So we basically always say, look, we can just make the analysis on the Swiss law. And then obviously you have two types of jurisdictions. You have small countries like Switzerland and Argentina and others, not a small country, but let's say less powerful than the United States maybe, that basically say we have control until our borders and that's where it ends. And in the United States, it has a longer arm. And so basically when we advise customers, we always say you got to figure out two things: the jurisdiction in which you're located and US law. So US law is like omnipresent. It really is. In every project that we have US counsel involved because it really needs to happen. It needs to be because the SEC's reach is very long. And but yeah, ultimately, I mean, a client says, we want to issue it to all people all over the world. And if a German customer buys a token, it's possible that the German financial market authorities, send you a letter. This is all possible. So that's the reason why a lot of people, when they do ICOs, they do KYC, know your customer, just to have a little bit of an idea, also to show that you are in fact interested in the identity of the purchasers. And but once it's out there, it can be sold in a secondary market. It can pop up, suddenly on an SEC tax return, and then SEC says, "Oh wait, what's that token? Where has that been issued?" And that's how it starts. So yeah, there's a ton of questions, and these are really big difficulties. So the cross-border topic is huge. Yeah.
Thank you. Navroop, do you have any? Clarify, what does ICO mean?
An ICO is an initial coin offering. And the usual example that I give is, let's say you're buying tokens in Tesla. There is a company that's manufacturing Tesla, right? So you're not buying shares in the company Tesla, but instead you're buying a portion of the right to the product, the car that this company is going to manufacture. Now, note the fact that car has not been built yet. Note that there is a plan and perhaps a strategy to execute it, and people, which may be anonymous or not, but essentially, if you're inspired enough, you say, okay, I want to have a portion in this product that has not been built yet, or a service. This could be a service or productized service, as we often call a whole bunch of things and at the Digital Economist. And so you're not really buying shares in a company. Now, this could be different depending on the way the token the ICO is structured, right? The initial coin offering itself is structured. This could mimic kind of like an equity stake. A good example of that could be like the DAOs, the Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. Nobody's really talking about those right now, but essentially, well, for those of you who've been early enough and remember things in the space, I think this was 2015 or 2016 when the first DAO was launched on the Ethereum blockchain, and there was a small problem with the code. It wasn't because it was bad actors. It's just that there was a bug in the code. And somebody was able to extract all that money people invested in the Decentralized Autonomous Organization to a single bank account. So somebody was able to steal everything, essentially. And at that time, if I remember correctly, it was at least 40 to 50% of the entirety of circulation of tokens on the Ethereum blockchain. So what the founders did was it's like a time machine, and that could be an analogy depending on, again, how much you know about blockchain, but they basically reset and said, okay, we are not going to use the updated or the other, I guess the other thing you can use is software, right? Your software most of your applications are updated around 3 months cycle, right? And so they said, okay, so we are in Q3, but we're gonna go back and use Q2 version of the software in which the actual fraud has not occurred. So that's kind of how it played out. And so there were big questions around so much for all the decentralization, so much for all the transparency, so much for all the no one person is controlling the code, but no, the people who are writing the code, they do, and that's also why it's so important to have diversity and diverse voices and in the space, and really engaging all kind of stakeholders, because otherwise this becomes another rich people's, yet another bank account. Just a few years ago, there wasn't any regulation around foundations, for example, in the United States. So basically they were trust funds for, the descendants of billionaires, until there was regulation that, no, you have to give away this much money every year to maintain the status of being a foundation, otherwise it's taxable, right? And I can talk at length about some of the regulatory sort of considerations. I haven't kept myself completely up to date as I did until 2018 with sort of even the micro movements in the blockchain space. But until then, I've actually trained groups of lawyers as well. But currently, sort of, where we're looking at Singapore strong with ICOs, again, has been an example in innovation in Asia, and of course, Hong Kong and China and other economies are much more early adopters of digital technologies and peer-to-peer transactions. And then, of course, the M-Pesa is another example that comes to mind. And Switzerland is, of course, the world's bank account. So I'm actually not surprised at all that it's more sophisticated. Of course, a challenge on the US side of things is that there is the regulatory landscape itself is fragmented. It's not that the SEC is not trying to be helpful. I actually attended the very first fintech summit in 2016 in DC. Ended up living 2 minutes away from that, in 2019. But at that time, we thought we knew everything as industry practitioners, and they were just debating, whether it should be called an ICO, whether it should be called this and that, just like terminology. So, and those kind of things are important. I mean, if you pick up any contract, the first thing that's there are the bylaws, right? What are we calling what? You define that in the beginning. This is party A, this is party B, this is what that term means. So unfortunately, they're stuck with that sort of, mindset, for the lack of a better term, or that precedence. So long story short, we've seen a big sort of ICO. I've seen the whole beginning, middle, and NFTs are kind of right at the start, unless sort of regulators come in and say something that has a tangible, I think, impact on the space. We are going to see even bigger NFTs. So there is that space. There's the opportunity there. There is a race among current blockchains, some big names, over and beyond Ethereum and Bitcoin. I think Cardano and Algorand and others who are racing to kind of offer that as a toolkit to developers. So people launch the non-fungible tokens on their blockchains. And like in the ICO space, essentially a lot of fluff is kind of gonna fall to the side. So a few kind of tangible ones would remain. I'm actually not up to date on how many ICOs are still building. That is a data point I'd like to be able to see.
So that was a wealth of knowledge. Thank you. Which brings me to the question of how do we gain that knowledge, especially as law students or lawyers? You mentioned that you train lawyers. Like, do you think that lawyers should go out, or law students, and get more technical somehow? Or how do we acquire this knowledge? What do we need to learn?
Yeah. There is a whole bunch of resources out there. Back in 2016, 2017, I just had like my own personal Google Doc, and I had these people nonstop reaching out on LinkedIn. And I will just share the link to the document. I said, okay, here are the best resources I can offer you. Because I think I got that question a few thousand times, if not more, until I just, accepted the fact that I cannot humanly manage LinkedIn. But one of the early things, I think the reason for a lot of attention was because we wrote the biggest course on blockchain, massive open online course, which is on the edX platform in the world. Around 200,000 people have taken that. So that has reached more than any other sort of course has. So that was Hyperledger. It was commissioned by Hyperledger, called Blockchain for Business. So it kind of starts to define things. We really took it from the first principles. Another data point, I usually talk about that the entire course was written by women only, end to end. So there was an attorney, an economist, myself, and two developers. And then, of course, they've done revisions since then. It's still out there. You can look it up. It's called Blockchain for Business at Hyperledger. It was available for auditing at the edX platform, but I think it's a paid course now. So that's a great sort of starting point. Because we took the time to define things from the first principles. Then there's a book that we did on blockchain economics, but really over the past years, there's so much that has come out in this space that you can, just Google searches would get you there if you're interested. But I would say, obviously, I think a few organizations come to mind. Harvard has a center on cybersecurity and internet. It's called Berkman Klein Center. They're doing some good work on sort of what digital blockchain and all that good stuff means for the society. And there's a spin-off of that called Koala, which is Collision of Automated Legal Applications. And they have a very strong legal representation working groups that actually learned a lot of things from. We even did like these moot courses, not courses, but like what is it called? Like a fake court setup when there is, like these model things. I used to do these model United Nations ones. But that was the first time, and I was like in the front row. I was like, listening to all of this, and it was so interesting. And this was, I think, 2017. So if there's actually a lawsuit that involves tokens, and how would the judges, the lawyers, how would the lawyers present their case? How would the judge sort of look at it from a different sort of regulatory regimes? And just to kind of finish the point around regulation that Michael talked about, within the US, there's more than one regulators, and that's a challenge you run into. That's, obviously the regulatory ecosystem is not just, wide reaching, it's also fragmented. So internally, it's just as challenging within the US, because you don't know if it's going to be the SEC or the CFTC or any other regulator that's going to kind of come down on it. And then, of course, there's state law and so on and so forth, which is not something you run into kind of in more union sort of states, forms of government, compared to kind of a true federation like the United States. So yeah, there's this whole bunch of stuff, but there are parties that are kind of doing work to bring that clarity, even negotiate with lawyers, or even file lawsuits, honestly, in the last administration. I know some players who did not take into account the voice of the industry, and trade unions just file lawsuits. So that's they didn't leave time for industry comments and such. Another friend of mine is running the Chamber of Digital Commerce, which is 7 years old, out of DC now. So that's another great resource to kind of look at. But really, I actually just shared my LinkedIn. So if you just scroll through the previous posts and talks, there's a whole bunch of resources over the past 5 years or so that you can explore. So I'll pause here.
Thank you. Michael, what did you do? Did you take like a economics class? Did you study some code? How did you get proficient in this area?
To be honest, I spent a lot of time on Reddit. I went to Reddit, I went to various subreddits. I just, read. I just consumed. I read what people were writing. I did some deep dives, and obviously you have to be careful, not to take everything at face value when you see it. But it's, it's one community that I like, but I mean, it's very Ethereum focused. It's Finance, or ETH Finance. And what's good about the community in a sense is that they will point you to other directions, right? And I think really, if you have the interest, you will find the sources, right? You probably will not be able to get up to speed on blockchain in 10 hours. I don't think that really works. You can, have some, first exposure and kind of watch some YouTube videos. But I, for myself, what did work is that I just, took it up in small bites, right? I didn't really take a big class. Maybe that would have been great. I don't know. I don't know. I think Navroop has mentioned a lot of good sources that probably would have been wonderful to do. But I kind of, I built that. It's like a mosaic. You just, find little stones there, and suddenly you have like more aha effects, and then you say like, suddenly it starts making sense. I think the biggest issue in blockchain that I encountered is that it's really not intuitive. At least I thought it's really not intuitive. And once you do understand it, you think it does make sense. But yeah, it's not something that we've seen before. And so yeah, if you're interested, I mean, also reach out to me. I can give you some hints. YouTubers, that sometimes, when I'm cooking, I watch like YouTube videos of people that I think, they actually provide good content. I think there's a lot of good people, but obviously, as I said, it's yeah, be careful not to. There's a lot of fanboys. There's a lot of people that want to hype their own projects, that just want to get rich. So there's a lot of bad actors in the space, and probably if you want to have very neutral sources, learn more about technology, follow Navroop's guidance. I would say that's probably the better way to go down. And yeah, because on Reddit, you may be drawn in, and you may end up, start hyping a project without really any foundation behind that. So yeah.
Thank you. So where do you think this industry will be in 5 to 10 years, especially for folks who are looking to invest a lot of time in understanding what blockchain is and how it affects them?
I think the industry, I don't know where it's going to be, but I believe it's going to grow. It's going to continue to grow. I mean, all the measurements that we do see is that, adoption is picking up. So there's more addresses that are created on all the blockchains, or more transactions that are happening. Transactions volumes are getting bigger. And, I mean, maybe there's going to be another dump, but I do believe that we're really just getting started, in the sense that a lot of people have looked at blockchain. I mean, when you talk about blockchain, everybody thinks of Bitcoin, right? And when people hear about Bitcoin for the first time, they think, oh, it's used by criminals. It's always the same. And I think everybody has that. I had that. I'm not sure if Navroop had that. I would be curious to hear that. The first time you actually hear about Bitcoin, I'm like, this sounds really shady. Isn't that like people extorting others, using that as like a way to hide payments? But more and more people are, with institutional investors getting on the train and making big investments, more money flowing into the space. I personally do believe that that a lot of great things will come out of it. I mean, some people have said, I'm not sure, it's probably exaggerated, but they say what mobile was to the tens, this blockchain is going to be to the 20s. And so yeah, we're in 2021, and I wouldn't be surprised if if we end up using a lot of blockchain applications without even knowing it. Because the biggest issue that we do have right now, maybe that's also worth mentioning, is that we have a scalability problem. So let's say like Ethereum maybe can do 15 transactions a second, which obviously, doesn't really allow you to do a lot of stuff. And then, but I think the same way that we use now the internet without knowing how the HTTP protocol works, or how all that really stuff really functions, we end up using it. And I think that's probably going to happen to blockchain too.
So it's not just a trend, basically.
I don't think it's a fad, not at all.
Okay. Navroop, what's your take on this topic? The future of blockchain. Is it worth the investment, learning more about it?
Yeah, let's see. I am optimistic because I think there's enough momentum And if you kind of just, you know, look at a longer time horizon, again, if enough, you know, interesting people are looking at it seriously, and there's enough money in the ecosystem, you can expect something to come out. And that's usually applicable to any sort of innovation. Right. So for example, artificial intelligence is another example. If enough companies, and now we're seeing is that institutional investors are playing in this space as well. Last time I checked, more than 70 central banks are, you know, looking at blockchain as a technology to kind of just from a, I guess, from a security perspective as well. They're looking at digital asset space and sort of having, you know, so most of the money right now is not physical money, you know, it's digital money. There's a very small fragment that's physical money. If you go to the bank and if you have 10 million and if you go ask, I need $10 million, they likely don't have it, you know, if it's a small bank around. And this is just an analogy. Of course, there's statutory liquidity requirements that central banks issues to, you know, to commercial bankers and banks. So and then there's also CSR, the central bank statutory requirements around maintaining some liquidity. But and so, you know, if you're looking at money that is more secure, then that alone is a big use case for central banks. So there's that realm of activity. Then there is the big financial institutions that, you know, for example, if you're buying an index with Fidelity, you're probably getting exposed to crypto as well, you know, and that's their way to, you know, bring enough or more higher profits to their investors, right, or purchasers of index funds. So there's that activity, and then there's kind of more innovative NFTs, decentralized finance, smaller companies that are looking to kind of disrupt business as usual, if you may. So they usually would attack smaller or specific niche areas, say finance or supply chains or charity. Providence is a big use case, you know, just being able to prove that something is true. And so, you know, there's blockchain that's everywhere right now, and and has been very strongly in 2018 to 2019 when we kind of saw that crypto crash. So I am optimistic. I think stuff is going to happen. And if you are looking to be in the space, it's a good time because the internet history is being made as we speak. So it's a good time to enter the space and, you know, have a meaningful contribution. I think what is annoying, for the lack of a better term, is just people who just kind of read up a few articles and then lecture everyone on blockchain. Usually it's like, you know, experts on the other side and people who've been around, who've helped, you know, write, honestly, some of these regulations. And so I see a lot of that noise as well. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing to be enthusiastic about and, you know, be excited about a certain technology. But I think one of the things I did early on, which is kind of also what brought a lot of attention to my work, was I looked for what the differentiated angle was. And there were no economists in the space at that point. A lot more crypto economists popped up, of course, straight out of college in the last couple of years. But at that time, no one was thinking about, well, what does it mean for socioeconomic structures and that capacity to, you know, both think macro or, you know, from a vision perspective, being able to take into consideration what has been said and written. And of course, this was all sort of piggybacking on, you know, my training as a scientist. I think that's what would really make a big difference. So I would encourage everyone to do that.
Thank you.